I have a good feeling about this.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to talk about a film that really means something to them, either something they grew up with or something that they connect to personally. So normally that opens the doors to a wide swath of films, from big blockbusters to foreign films, romantic comedies to dramas, and all over the map. So it's my pleasure to announce that this is actually going to be the first in a series of episodes that we're going to be doing, talking about the Star Wars saga, Episode 1, all the way to the Rise of Skywalker. So we're going to be talking about a different episode in the Star Wars saga every month, and really the whole thing is inspired by today's guest. I'm joined today by Kimberly Cook. Kimberly, welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So as I was saying, I broached the topic with you, and we had talked about having you on the show, and you selected the Phantom Menace, which we'll get into in a little bit, which was really kind of the impetus for this entire series. So thank you for the inspiration, first of all.
Great.
So why don't you tell people listening a little bit about who you are, what your role is in film criticism in general, and where they can find your work.
Well, like I said, I'm Kimberly Cook, and I hail from Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. If you've ever seen the cult classics Slapshot or All the Right Moves, you know where I'm coming from. Both of those classic films were shot here in my town. And I actually had a small bit part in the All the Right Moves movie. I was at the football game. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And I was 3.
Oh wow!
And I was an extra in the movie. So yeah, that was an interesting time. But I work for Monkeys Fighting Robots and Pop Axiom, both, doing some comic book criticism, some film criticism, and television criticism. And you can find my work on both of their sites. And that's actually how I met Rob.
Yeah, exactly. I was the movies editor for Monkeys Fighting Robots for a brief time. I was doing some writing for them. And yeah, that's how we first connected. Definitely check out Kimberly's work over at Monkeys Fighting Robots and Pop Axiom. So we have a legit film critic in the house with us today.
I call myself a professional nerd.
There you go. That works too. Well, and that's the funny thing too. Like nowadays, especially with the prevalence of genre fare, where everything is sci-fi or fantasy or superheroes. I mean, right now everybody's talking about Avengers and Game of Thrones, which both, both fall in that camp. A professional nerd, they might as well rename film critics as professional nerds, because that's really kind of part of the job description now.
Absolutely. There's so much content, and you gotta absorb it all. And happy to be a part of a platform that allows me to be part of the content that's out there too. So that's a lot of fun.
Have you always been? I've been a big fan of sci-fi, fantasy, and all that other stuff, or is it just, has it something that's really kind of grown on you over the years?
Probably it's kind of grown on me over the years. I had some really good friends in high school who have fueled my love of film. And one of my best friends in high school was a huge X-Men fan, and she was the one that I always went to all of the comic book movies with. And, we absorbed ourselves into that genre too. Like, if the movie would come out, we'd go buy the graphic novels, and we'd go buy the merchandise and the trading cards and the action figures and stuff. And we really immersed ourselves into the nerd culture. So that's probably like my high school, junior high days when I really started to get into the whole, I guess, if you want to call it a nerd culture.
Yeah, and it's funny, I think, just like in the last, since I was a kid in the 90s, and how that's really broken into the mainstream. I remember back in the day, like, we were lucky if we got like a Batman movie, and now every other month there's like Spider-Man, Avengers, and Venom, like everything, every character that you can think of. There's 2 Ant-Man movies. We live in a world where there are 2 Ant-Man movies. For instance, it's crazy how that's changed, and how it's become such a pop cultural phenomenon on a global scale.
And I will say, I'll probably get chastised for this, that two of the movies that really sucked me into the nerd culture were the two Joel Schumacher Batman films. You looking back on them now, they're so campy. But you know what? If it's what kind of birthed my love of comic book film and comic book genre and immersing myself in that world, then so be it. Thanks, Joel Schumacher.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we've already mentioned we're going to talk about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So let's listen to a little bit of the trailer right now.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
He can see things before they happen.
He can help you.
The Force is unusually strong with him.
He was meant to help you.
Anakin! Tell him to take off!
Will I ever see you again?
What does your heart tell you?
Are you sure about this? Trusting our fate to a boy we hardly know?
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I sense much fear in you. The boy is dangerous. They all sense it. Why can't you?
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
That was a little bit of the trailer for Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, written and directed by George Lucas. And I think it's safe to say it's close between Episode 1 and Episode 2 for what is kind of, I guess, the most divisive of the Star Wars. And that's funny. Well, actually, now it's Last Jedi, too. It's weird how the Star Wars fandom has fragmented over the years. But when this came out, even though people nowadays probably protest on this was a huge deal. And people actually loved the movie, I think, when it first came out. Like, I don't remember people coming out of it saying it was terrible. It even got good reviews from critics at the time and things like that. So when did you initially see The Phantom Menace, and why is that the film that you want to talk about?
Well, first of all, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of The Phantom Menace, which I think, looking back now, it's hard to believe that 20 years have passed since this movie has come out. But you mentioned about, like the criticism behind, how Star Wars fans have become so divided and, they either love or hate, the stuff that comes out. But 20 years ago, we didn't have the social media platforms that we do now. I mean, things like AOL and chat rooms and things like that were kind of just becoming really popular and really mainstream, where the outlet of people to express their either joy or their anger towards a film wasn't readily available back then. So I think that kind of saved the prequels from being chastised as much as they are now. I will tell you that at the time, I had actually just met my husband. We were both working at Toys R Us at the time, which was so fun. And he was a huge Star Wars nerd, still is. He kind of was one that kind of immersed me in that world. And, these movies are coming out that, we're hunting down the toys. And I actually worked at a midnight shift of when the toys were released. So the merchandising behind the movie, I think, really kind of sucked me in too. That's the first time I kind of remember there being midnight showings. And we had missed the midnight showing because we happened to be at a concert in Pittsburgh that night and didn't make it back into town in time to go to the midnight showing with our friends. So we were kind of bummed about that, but we saw it like the very first showing the next day. So of course that was definitely an opening day or type of movie, And you know what? I enjoyed it. I did have the opportunity though to read the novelization before going into the movie. Reading the book ahead of time, I think, kind of opened my eyes a little more to the story, and I think I understood it better. But it was one of those movies that it was action packed, it was funny, it was cute, but it was telling that story of a character that is so iconic in movie history, and bringing us into who he was as a child and how he got to become part of a Jedi training. And it was just one of those movies where you're interested to know, how did he get this way? So breaking into that, I think, you get interested in it, and it was a good story. I do think it is a good story. I mean, like I said, people chastise the movie now, but it was a good story. It has its flaws. what Star Wars movie doesn't anymore. But overall, I mean, I enjoyed the movie. I saw it in a theater, I think, 7 times.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, we went a lot, and you know, we enjoyed the experience of it. So how about you? When did you first see it?
Well, it's funny because I'm talking about Star Wars on this podcast quite often, but I didn't really. I don't know. I guess I wasn't raised right because Star Wars was not really part of my life until I think right before the special editions came out. Actually,
okay.
I remember seeing commercials for that and being like, "Huh, what's that about? That's interesting." And then we went to the video store and they had I guess this was before they pulled them off the shelves, the original versions of the original trilogy. So I think we got them all probably within the span of a week or so, and I watched all 3 of those and loved them, and then saw them in theaters because I don't know if you probably remember, but they had A New Hope in January and Empire in February, and then Return of the Jedi in March. And A New Hope, which was at that point was 20 years old, made like $130 million in theaters, the special edition or something like that. And it's funny because I actually just saw it at a theater this past weekend, a small social club / speakeasy style screening room thing had it playing in town here in Tampa, Florida, where we are, and so I saw it on the big screen for the first time since special edition. So that was fun.
Great.
And then after that, my brother is significantly younger than I, so we were getting the action figures and all that. So by the time Phantom Menace had come out, I was fully on board. I had the box set of the VHS for the special editions, and we have also got a lot of the merchandise. I actually even remember having the screenplay of that movie, which, the screenplay in Phantom Menace is probably one of the more flawed aspects of it, I would say.
Yeah.
But so thinking back now, I was like, wow, I was so into it. My first email address was JAR1983 at AOL.com. So I was like, I totally didn't, and I guess had no issue with Jar Jar. I actually thought he was pretty funny when I saw it the first time. I know he's now the pariah of the Star Wars saga. Yeah, so I was completely, I know. So seriously, that's a whole thing. So I was completely bought into the whole thing at the time, and I think I saw it probably at least twice, 2 or 3 times in theaters. Which, when I love something, when I love like a character, a brand, whatever, I kind of buy into it completely. So I'm a Star Wars fan, and that includes all of it. So I consider Phantom Menace probably one of almost the black sheep of the Star Wars saga. But it's like, oh, come here, you're part of the family. I love you. You're a little scrappy or whatever. We have our issues, but you're still part of that world. So
absolutely,
that's exactly how I consider Phantom Menace. It's on the lower end of the scale for me as far as the main saga, but it's still like there's definitely elements which we'll get into that I'm like, oh, that's so cool, or like that little moment there that nobody really picked up on. Like there's little elements that I like a lot. All right, so the opening crawl. I think it gets a lot of crap because of the whole trade federation and the taxation on the trade routes and all that. But Star Wars has always been political. I just think people never realize it, or is never made quite as overt.
Sure.
So I think part of my issue with the film and why it feels like it feels to me kind of narratively disconnected from the rest of the saga is that in a lot of ways this is basically a prologue to everything else that comes afterwards. If we're looking at the main 6, the Lucas saga, as one story, this is basically the introduction of all the characters, and then episode 2 is where it really kicks off and shows the progression from film to film, I think.
Right.
I
agree completely.
Okay, yeah. And I think that the significant time jump is probably part of why I feel that way. But I like, right off the bat, I think the dynamic between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, that they're on the peacekeeping mission. They're supposed to be ambassadors for the Republic to sort out the mess with the Trade Federation and Naboo. The contrast between Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon as the rebellious Jedi and Obi-Wan as the very by-the-book, straight-laced Padawan. I think that's a fun dynamic, and I wish that we got more of it in this movie, actually.
It's mentioned several times about the things that Qui-Gon apparently had done to basically get himself kicked out of the Jedi Council.
Right.
But they were never really specified as to what he actually did that he got himself in trouble with. And that elusive bad boy attitude, for lack of a better word, I think really, rounded out his character. And I really would have liked to have explored a little bit more of that. And there might be more to that rebellious side that has come out in some of the recent novels. I think there's a recent novel that just came out that revolves around the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. I haven't had a chance to read yet. That aspect of his character, I think I would have liked to have had a little bit more of that.
Yeah, they just don't have a place for it in this movie, unfortunately, and we don't get that much time with Qui-Gon. And like you said, I think in the comics or the animated series or whatever, they've alluded to things here and there, and they've had him show up. But the fact that the only real I guess proper Jedi, like properly trained Jedi from this system of the Republic and the Jedi Temple and all of that we see in the films prior to this is Obi-Wan. So to right off the bat be introduced to someone who's complete opposite of Obi-Wan, I think, and this is something that the sequel trilogy gets lobbed out a lot. I think that the prequels don't get credit for how they really do try to expand the world. And I think that's the kind of the ongoing debate between the prequels and the sequels, is that the prequels, they falter in execution in places, but there's a lot of expanse going on from the original trilogy to the prequels, whereas the sequels are, so far a lot of it has been, hey, remember this? Hey, remember this? That kind of thing. Nostalgia trip, and I love the sequel trilogies as well, but I think that's an interesting argument that honestly really slides a little more credit over to Lucas, who got so much crap from fans for these prequels. I think particularly the episode 2 with the romance thing, which is out of the purview of this episode, but just looking at the prequel trilogy as a whole.
Oh, I think with the original mindset and doing the prequel trilogy was character development. And like I said, that's what made the story so interesting is, we're getting to see the history behind one of the most iconic characters in movie history. How did he, what training did he have? Where did he come from? How did he get so angry so fast? Mm-hmm. And what made him, turn to the dark side and that development from child to teenager to young adult to becoming Darth Vader. But in the meantime, you've also got the character development too, because you've got, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who, like you said, is the straight-laced, Padawan learner. He's, just coming into his own too. But then you watch him progress, throughout this trilogy series and to become basically the wise old man he turns out to be in episode 4. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then going with the sequel trilogy that we're working on now and soon to round out here in December, it does have a lot more than nostalgia factor where we're looking back and we are developing characters. Obviously we've had to introduce new characters to the series, but I really think that going back to the prequels, it was just laying a foundation to support the original trilogy that we all love so much.
I like the way that it explores the Jedi and expands on the fact that there are different types of Jedi that relate to the code in different ways, and the council, which we'll get to, and all of that. And then right off the bat, so you meet the Jedi, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and then you also right from the jump get a little Darth Sidious, and I think that is also very telling, especially considering what we're, I guess, now kind of expecting from the Rise of Skywalker, where he's going to play some kind of role in there. I love that in the first few minutes of this movie, episode 1 of the saga, that he's established right out the gate as the big bad.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely. And I do agree with you there, where I think it's great that we kind of jumped right into that yeah, we've got the bad guy here, and we're going to introduce you to him right off the bat, really quick. And then, there's always that mystery as who he really is. And, of course, as fans, you figure it out, throughout the film, who he actually is. But realizing that he was a puppet master throughout this whole thing. And definitely it shows in this particular film, what kind of a puppet master he really was with Padme.
He is the Phantom Menace of the title. That's the, that's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we're introduced really quickly to the Jedi. We're introduced really quickly to Sidious. And then we get what I think is a really fun action sequence, sort of a mini action set piece on the ship with the Jedi versus the droids. And, the battle droids are not really that much of a threat. I guess I always see it as like, they're more of a threat because of the sheer numbers and the volume of them than really the actual inherent power of them. Like, you can consider zombies, like not the fast modern zombies, but like the old school zombies where you should be able to just like throw a rock at them and knock them over is kind of, but they're surrounding you. What are you supposed to do? So I think, with the battle droids, I think Lucas leaves it open for comedic effect as well with the battle droids, but also leading into why you might want to think about upgrading to clones at some point, because there's only so far you could take with these guys.
Yeah, they were just a basic machine is all they were, and they were just this crude robot, and they were stupid. I mean, they looked at each other, inquisitively and as inquisitively as a robot can, I guess. But they had very basic speech patterns, and they didn't think rather quickly. So yeah, they were a pretty crude weapon that they were using. So,
well, to the point that they have to expand on that in the sequels. You get the super battle droids and all that. But I love the destroyers. I think that's a really cool idea for an enemy for the Jedi to fight. And I love a lot of the imagery in this opening sequence with the Dioxys goes off, and you see the lightsabers like in the smoke as they're coming out of the room, and Qui-Gon burning through the blast doors with the music swells up, which we'll obviously mention John Williams at some point here. I think that's, right off the bat, I think you're getting inventive uses of the Jedi's powers that you haven't seen before, that you didn't even think, oh yeah, that's right, they should be able to just burn through a blast door if they really need to. I love all that stuff.
Cutting through the door, I think was really kind of fun and different. And yeah, like you said, it's not something you really think of, but yeah, definitely like using the smoke with the Jedi coming out, and that's the first time you see those lightsabers lit. Mm-hmm. In episode 1, and it's just like, yeah, that's like your payoff almost. That's just a very cool moment.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's a great image to introduce these, like if you're watching these movies chronologically, if this is your introduction to a Jedi, you're really into it at this point, because you get the sense for just how powerful they are and how they can employ that in different ways. You get a little bit of the Force run here when they zip out of frame, and then towards the end with the lightsaber battle, you get the Force jumping and things like that. Like he really makes it a point of illustrating everything that they can do when they tap into the Force. But the sequence also introduces one thing that is actually honestly one of my pet peeves with this film particularly, is that I don't really like Obi-Wan in this movie. Like, I find him, like, he's really annoying. He's really kind of obnoxious. And I think that's probably intentional, because if we, in the next film, you see that this is generally how Lucas thinks that adolescent men are. Because Obi-Wan's supposed to be, I guess, about 20, early 20s maybe. So it looks almost where Anakin is in the next one. And and that's a big bummer for me, because I love Obi-Wan in pretty much every movie other than this one. Is personally one of my favorite characters, and McGregor is great in the part. So I guess it's just the role, like Obi-Wan just gets kind of short shrift in this movie until the end.
Yeah, until he kind of has to grow up, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it's almost like a loss of innocence kind of thing on Obi-Wan's side of things.
Well, yeah, once he basically has to step up to become that master that he needs to be.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's very critical of a lot of things that Qui-Gon does with Jar Jar and with Anakin and things like that. So we mentioned Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon. We mentioned McGregor as Obi-Wan. So our introduction here also pretty early on is Natalie Portman as Queen Amidala. The makeup, the costumes, the accent, it all looks cool. But what do you think about this character? And I guess to more broadly comment on the whole decoy ploy that is really kind of Amidala's thing, I guess.
I mean, having a decoy, I think, is smart. Obviously
right.
with the trade war that her planet was in and her city was in. The decoy I think was kind of a fun aspect to it. When I saw that, I kind of went back to Aladdin.
Okay.
Thinking back to Princess Jasmine, she's somebody who she's curious about, what's going on outside of those palace walls. And, her Padme wanting to go into, the towns on Tatooine just to explore and to see what the planet was like was something that royalty just doesn't do. So yeah, I kind of went back to the whole Jasmine thing where she's, walking out through the marketplace and she doesn't understand, how a marketplace works and what the commoners are doing. And that's kind of an analogy that kind of stuck with me. With her being, she was curious. Padme was curious about, what goes on these desert planets. Obviously she's never been in a desert planet before.
And Padme, I think she doesn't get enough credit for the position that she's in, because she's been essentially supposed to be 14 and suddenly in charge of a planet. And, she has to kind of basically learn on the job. And she's very susceptible to manipulation from, I don't know, a Sith Lord that happens to have her ear throughout every step of this. But she also, she clearly has her heart in the right place. She's really trying to do the best job that she can for her people. And then within the fact that, I guess part of the Naboo culture is the makeup and the crazy hairstyles and the really ornate dresses and things like that. The fact that she, in a way, kind of weaponizes that so that she can slip around undetected, so people really never know what she looks like, except Keira Knightley, who's in a lot of those scenes as Amidala. And I think that, I feel like that gets lost in the shuffle a little bit when it comes to Padme, who honestly is kind of given a disservice more as the trilogy goes on, is given kind of less and less to do. There's a podcast that I really love called Blank Check, where they started initially as a Star Wars podcast. So I've been listening to their first few episodes for the first time, and they have several episodes in the Phantom Menace, and they mention in there how I think Lucas or someone within the production has said that Amidala is really the protagonist of this movie, and I think you really see that. Like, everything is her mission that's really at the center, that's really driving the story forward. And all the other characters, the Jedi, Anakin, and everything is really kind of circulating around what Amidala sets out to do and what decisions she makes.
Right. That's true. Yeah, it does kind of revolve around her and her battle with the Trade Federation.
Right. And it's like, we got to leave the planet because they're going to make you sign the treaty. Okay, we need to go back to the planet, and it's her decision to go back to Naboo and leave Coruscant, all of that. So I like the introduction with her, and you could really pick apart the performances in these movies, and I think in this one particularly, Lucas was so focused on the effects side of it and really pushing that maybe he could have gotten better performance out of the actors for the most part throughout this cast especially. But the characters are there on paper, like the ideas are there, like, and that's the thing why I get kind of irritated when people dismiss the prequels out of hand, because I feel like there's so much interest, there's so much to them, like the design of them, the politics, the themes, the stories behind everything that he's trying to get across. It just doesn't 100% get there, but you have to admire the ambition with everything. I mean, just the design of Naboo alone, like the city, the ships, the Otogunga where the Gungans live and all that. Like it's really gorgeous, like visuals.
Oh, absolutely. And I think ILM was coming hot off of, I guess, Jurassic Park. Am I doing my timelines right in my head? Where I think that they were just so gung-ho with this new technology that they really wanted to explore what they could do with these new planets and these new worlds that they couldn't do in the original trilogy. The effects obviously weren't there back in the 70s and early 80s. Mm-hmm. That I think they were just kind of excited to see what can we create. And what they created was gorgeous.
I think you could also really see the limitations of that though too, and that's the perfect segue into Jar Jar Binks, who at the time we were like, oh my gosh, this character's not there. But the seams are so apparent. It's very obvious that the actors are having trouble playing off of, Ahmed Best with a leotard on or whatever they had. And I think Ahmed Best was actually in the scenes, but he had like a headpiece on, I think, because Jar Jar's supposed to be taller and things like that. But that's one element of this movie that does not hold up. Like when it's all CG later on with the battle droids and the Gungan armies, like that's fine. It's it looks almost like a video game cutscene, but it doesn't impact the film that much, because I think they knew at that point that they would be much easier to just render everything in CGI rather than try and integrate, which is why all the CG characters are in their own little battle where everybody else is doing their own thing. So what are your thoughts on Jar Jar as far as the visually, and then also the way the characters played, and like obviously there's a lot to talk since this movie came out of the kind of racist caricatures with the Newt Gunray and Watto, and especially Jar Jar Binks. What's kind of your take on that?
God bless Ahmed Best.
Well, yeah,
that poor guy got so much crap for his portrayal of Jar Jar, and I always like to say, hate the character, not the actor.
Right.
But with Jar Jar, I think what they were going for was their comedy aspect. We weren't introduced to. With the original trilogy, we had the Laurel and Hardy, 3PO and R2D2 that they provided our slapstick humor. Where we did have R2 fairly quickly in the movie, but we weren't introduced to 3PO until a little bit further in. Where I think Jar Jar was supposed to fill the comedic role. Where, you still got a sci-fi action movie, but you have to have that little humor element too. But I think it just kind of went a little over the top. His speech being, kind of silly. Obviously, he's not all that bright. The clumsiness, and that's how he got kicked out of his planet. I think was maybe a little over the top. But I think, Lucas kind of took that and, turn the volume up to 11.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where he got the criticism from it. I think if he would have maybe dialed him down just a little bit, Jar Jar probably wouldn't be as chastised as he is now. As for the rest of the Gungans, you got Boss Nass. Oh my goodness, Boss Nass. Another character that just dialed up to 11. The shaking the head, the spitting everywhere, and just I don't know. That was just one of the characters that I just did not care for.
Well, I agree with you, and I like, and that's the frustrating thing about this trilogy, but more so this one than the other two, honestly, is that I like what they're going for. I like what he's trying to do with Jar Jar. He's trying to have the kind of Naboo commoner who just wrapped up in this whole thing, how he's affected, and sort of be the audience surrogate. Like, whoa, Jedi, what? How did this happen? I was just walking around, hanging out, and now all of a sudden I'm following a Jedi around. I have a life debt. That's the other thing. He's basically kind of following Qui-Gon around as like a pseudo slave. Being like, no, me since with the life debt and all of that. It's like there's a lot of that. That's, I think,
and I think with the life debt, I think they were really kind of trying to make Jar Jar the Chewbacca of this trilogy,
right?
And it just it didn't work.
No,
it just did not work.
It's
especially with the whole life debt thing. I think was kind of how they were trying to tie it together,
mm-hmm.
And it didn't quite work that well.
No.
He's not your lovable pet. You're not your lovable puppy Wookiee that wants to come around and he's interesting. Jar Jar's annoying. he's the annoying neighbor kid who just won't go home.
Right, but that's the funny thing is that a lot of people that grew up with this movie, I guess, who are much younger, probably have a completely different take. That's the thing with the prequels, like. He's so focused towards the younger audience, like the kids, and he's also the vehicle through which you get like poop jokes and fart jokes and all that other all that other stuff. That and it's funny because I remember a friend of mine, because I was in high school when this came out, and I remember he was like, saw an image of, this really cool character Jar Jar Binks, thinking he was going to be like the Chewbacca, and then when we saw the movie, I was like, wow, this is not at all what we were expecting. Because you think that they could have done something interesting where he could have been a warrior instead of a bumbling general kind of by accident in the final set piece. So
Dumb luck.
Pretty much. One thing I did want to mention though is that I like the even though Jar Jar is like bumbling and muttering his whole way through it, the trip through the planet core, I like some of the thematics that brings up, talking about Obi-Wan mentions that the Gungans and Naboo are a symbiont circle. Symbiosis comes up later on with the midi-chlorians. The theme about there's always a bigger fish, and then how the kind of the issue that they see Darth Maul as the villain, but it's really Sidious. It's that they don't even, kind of the master that's pulling the strings behind the whole thing. Like little tiny touches like that. I'm like, all right, Lucas, that's very on the nose, but you're trying for something, and I see what you're doing, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I never thought of the bigger fish thing with Maul and Palpatine. That's actually a really good point.
Yeah, exactly, because they don't, they don't even know that he exists until, I guess, episode 3. Really, they don't really confront him at all. He blends in really well, I guess. I don't know. That's. Do you think this is a good? Here's a question that I had been wondering. Do you think people, like, if we hadn't had the original trilogy before this, do you think anyone would have been fooled that Sidious and Palpatine were the same person? Because he doesn't even really try to hide it. Or I guess, is it more of a dramatic irony thing that we're supposed to see right through that?
I think if you were going into episode 1 completely blind without knowing a whole lot about the Star Wars saga in general, I think people probably wouldn't have picked up on it. Okay. Because they probably weren't looking for it. As Star Wars fans going into this, I think, you kind of, you're looking for those little things. You're looking for those little hints. And who is he really? Okay, yeah, it's got to be him, But it's never really confirmed until episode 3. But, obviously, you've got your fans who dig in. And, yeah, as fans, you figure it out. But I think going in, if you were completely blind, knowing nothing about the saga at all, I think that probably would have pulled the wool over your eyes.
Right. I also think it's interesting, the parallels, and I noticed it watching it more closely recently for this podcast, the parallels between Sidious and Amidala, and that they're both obviously politicians. They both kind of have this double life that they're leading, and just I feel like little things like that really lend credence to the argument that this is Amidala's story and not really Anakin's or Obi-Wan's or anybody's. And so I like that dynamic, and the fact that it feels more balanced in that way.
Yeah, I have to agree with that one. Yeah, that's something I hadn't thought of either with the parallels between the two. But you bring up a really good point. And sometimes people lead double lives, and you kind of have to. And with these two characters, I think that really fleshes out who they really are and what they're about.
How do you feel about some of the more fan servicey moments? And I'm thinking specifically of R2's. And that's the other thing. I feel like this movie, in a lot of ways, kind of was the birth of fan service, because it was a prequel to essentially the biggest film franchise of all time. You get all those little moments of, Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi, or what's his number? R2D2. It's almost like Spaceballs, like leaning out into the audience. Like, did everybody get that?
But my husband likes to say that, the line of, Anakin Skywalker meet Obi-Wan Kenobi is probably one of the biggest movie lines that quotes that came out of this trilogy that says so much about the trilogy. Yeah. Yeah. It's really is emblematic of his approach, I think. And as for the fan service, especially, I think they really milked the fan service with the droids. Like you said, what's this droid's name? That little droid did it. He's R2D2. And then we finally get to meet 3PO. And it's something that I picked up on too. Is these two droids follow us throughout the saga. They're his and hers. Mm-hmm. that R2 was Padme's and 3PO is Anakin's, and it's like, mom and dad got together and so did their droids.
Yeah. It's a good way of looking at it. It's also, I mean, it's a Star Wars tradition too to have 3PO and R2 in all of the main saga movies. I think they're the only characters that are in every single one. So then they get away from Naboo. They wind up ending up on a distant planet run by the Hutts called Tatooine. It's also fun. Tatooine always feels like home base for this entire franchise because that's the first planet that we really see in the original, in A New Hope, and because its connection to the Skywalker lineage. What are your thoughts about, I guess, the return of Tatooine, and then I guess we'll get to Jake Lloyd as Anakin?
It does kind of bring things full circle, Obviously, Luke grew up on Tatooine. And now we're figuring out that Anakin grew up on Tatooine too. So, I mean, is there fan service behind it? Sure. Jake Lloyd. What can we say about
I
Jake
know.
Lloyd?
I feel like I've kind of purposefully been putting, that's the one major performance we haven't, and then Ray Park, but we'll get to him.
For being a very young and very vanilla and very green actor, he's, how old was he when he did episode 1? 10, 11?
Something like that.
Something like that. I mean, as a child actor, being thrown into not only a movie that they knew was going to be huge, but putting the pressure on this kid to basically develop a character that is so iconic. I have to be young Darth Vader. How does that weigh on his shoulders? Was his performance bad? Yes and no. He had his moments, both good and bad. But like you said, what can you expect of a kid that young with that kind of pressure? Did the screenplay kind of play into him being a little off? Maybe. But I think for what he had to work with, he did okay. Well, what are your thoughts behind Jake Lloyd?
I do not think he gives a good performance in this movie, but it's also... first of all, it's really hard to find a Haley Joel Osment. Child actors in general, you have to kind of grade on a little bit of a curve. And even if you had someone like Haley Joel Osment or like, I don't know, Dakota Fanning or whoever was really precocious and really delivering amazing performances at the age of about 10, even they couldn't sell lines like, "Are you an angel?" and like things like that. It's like this. Lucas does not know how to, and that's very obvious in the prequel trilogy. He does not really know how to write romance, and he does not really know how to write children. And it's unfortunate. I think Jake Lloyd, first of all, had ridiculous pressure to try and play this role, and knowing that we were going to see, it's all there in the teaser poster where he's walking away and you have the famous the Vader shadow right behind him. It's like he was literally standing in Vader's shadow, and there was no way he was ever going to meet that. So was he terrible in this movie? Yes. Did he deserve to have it basically ruin his entire life? Not really. Again, like you said with Ahmed Best, hate the character, the performance, whatever, not the actor. Don't go around yelling wizard at him while apparently that's something that happened to him, going to high school and things like that. It was a torturous thing for him, this movie, especially being that it was the first Star Wars movie in 16 years, and it was this huge phenomenon. It's still towards the top of the box office charts. And I think the major movie that I'm aware of that he did before this was Jingle All the Way, which is another guilty pleasure that I'll have to talk about on this podcast at some point. Because I've never seen it. I'm going to have to put that on my list. You should check that out. It's kind of... So Jake Lloyd, yeah. So not great, but not his fault. Mostly, I lay that mostly on Lucas, and does not really have chemistry, I guess, if you want to call it that, with Natalie Portman. But even the fact that I'm saying they don't have chemistry feels weird already. But it's clear that he's trying to Lucas is trying to lay the groundwork for what comes next for them. These are Luke and Leia's parents and that kind of thing. Do you think that's a strange decision to have this movie to, first of all, portray Vader as a 9-year-old, but already kind of the way that his relationship with Padme develops. Do you think that's a weird starting point, or do you think that's also like it has a certain novelty of it that we don't usually see this kind of dynamic played out on screen?
It was awkward. The age difference, with the age difference, I think really threw people for a loop too. But yeah, you've got this much younger little boy trying to flirt with a teenage girl,
and he is so obviously flirting with her, trying to.
Yes, and it's so going over her head, and she's just oblivious to the whole thing. She could care less that he's trying to be cute and funny with her, but yeah, I guess you kind of had to lay that little bit of a groundwork of, okay, this is where they met.
Right. So they meet Anakin, Watto. What are your thoughts on Watto, real quick? Because I think he's, is it a racist caricature? A little bit. Is it still kind of a fun character to watch? And I think so. I think it's mostly the design and just the gruffness that we get from Watto. What are your Watto thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when you think of, you go to your neighborhood garage, and this is going to come off as sounding horribly stereotypical. You go to your neighborhood garage, and I'm really going to screw this up and say grease monkeys of the neighborhood, where they're the mechanics of the neighborhood. They're the ones selling you the auto parts. They're the ones who really do get down and dirty and get into the parts and the repairs and the things that you obviously don't want to do yourself. So that gruffness, I think, really did come off in Watto. So I'm not quite sure if that's what Lucas was really going for. I mean, that's kind of what I took out of it, because I live in an area, there's neighborhood, garages down the street where the guys are filthy, and they, they're that type of guys who are running the joint.
Right.
So that's kind of where I went with that, where, I kind of get where he was going with that. Watto didn't seem like the type who was actually going to get dirty. He was more or less making Anakin do all of that.
Right.
Which is how he became so mechanically inclined. And he mentions in episode 2, going with the saga here, that he always liked to fix things. And, it's simple. When you think something's broken, you fix it, But I think, I do think Watto's character, I think, kind of embodied a little bit of that in my mind. What are your thoughts on Watto?
Generally, I like Watto. I think he's kind of a fun character in this, and and he hasn't nearly been considered as problematic as we were mentioning Jar Jar. So
right. Oh, nowhere near.
Yeah.
Nowhere near.
Then we get into and Anakin really doesn't like sand. Sandstorms are dangerous. So I like that they established that right out the gate, and it plays into why they would hide his son on Tatooine, because Anakin's clearly not going to go back to a sand planet. The Sith Lords is trying to reach out to them. They're trying to bait them with a distress call from Naboo. So then they go back and they meet Shmi Skywalker. And I think Pernilla August is actually pretty good in this movie, considering the material she's working with, and providing that kind of strong, silent, maternal figure for Anakin, where we kind of get a sense of his value system and like the stability that he had prior to being swept on this adventure towards Jedi knighthood.
Like, I think she always kind of knew there was something special about her son, and that's something I think has always been in the back of her mind, where, she wanted to raise him right and raise him, as straight in the line as possible. And she kind of had to, by being a slave, by being one of Watto's slaves. But I think she always kind of knew there was something. He was destined for greater things. He wasn't destined to remain a slave. And then when the Jedi come into her life, obviously, chance, I guess you could say, she kind of knew this was his ticket out. So I think she was very curious when Qui-Gon arrived, and she was a little, inquisitive with him, what are his intentions, but she pretty much really let him go, and let Anakin basically take off with this stranger who only had come into her world, a day or two before then.
Well, and there's the element that, she doesn't really, in this movie, kind of sidesteps okay, there was no father. She can't explain what happened. What the hell does that mean? Were you just all of a sudden, oh, I'm pregnant? What's going on? And I sense that my gut tells me we're going to learn more about that in episode 9, that they're finally going to provide a little bit better answer there. And maybe canonically in the films, at least, confirm that that Palpatine was, started the whole Skywalker lineage to begin with. Because I know that's something that has been alluded to in the novels and things like that, but it's obviously never been really readdressed in the films since here, where she basically dodges the question. And I think that's a good way to wrap Palpatine back into a film that literally has Skywalker in the name of the film.
Yeah, it would definitely bring things full circle. She says there was no father. Okay, all right, but there just wasn't a father during his childhood.
Right.
To have a male figure in his life during his upbringing.
Right.
Is there a father?
It's like
somewhere along the line, like that.
Exactly. It's like
just because of how she said
Shmi. That's not how it works. It's like, oh, okay, it wasn't in the picture, but come on.
Welcome to nature.
Babies don't just materialize.
Right.
So
maybe they do in sci-fi fantasy.
Maybe he was born from the Force, I guess. And as soon as Qui-Gon said, "Who is his father?" that all the fans in the audience were leaning in, like, "Yeah, what's going on with that?" And then they're like, "Oh, there was no father." Like, "Oh," sit back in their seats. Come on, George, don't play us like that.
Well, they did that same stuff on us in episode 8. So
yes, they did. We'll see. It's up to you, JJ. Finish. We gotta answer all our pull some answers out of your mystery box and let us know what's going on. And of course, kind of in tandem with that is the concept of midichlorians that really pissed fans off about how the Force is this mystical energy that anyone can tap into, but it helps if you have it in your blood, I guess.
And I'll go back to what I said about, my birth of the love of the sci-fi genre. It was almost like midichlorians made him seem like they were like Jedi or mutants. Mm-hmm. And that concept seemed very weird to me. Your blood's off, so that makes you special.
Yeah.
Really? Okay. That whole midichlorian thing just kind of that threw me for a loop, and they focused on it. Like they drove that point home, and it's like, okay, but then they brushed it off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like they spent a lot of time during those scenes. His numbers are off the charts, and blah blah blah.
Even Master Yoda doesn't have that account that high or whatever.
Right, and they made a point to bring things like that up, and then all of a sudden, a half hour later, we never hear of midichlorians again.
Right.
So I don't know, that whole concept seems very odd and out of place.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I guess the idea is that people with midichlorian counts are more predisposed to using the Force, but it muddies waters that didn't need to be muddied in the first place. And I'm glad that at least throughout this trilogy, you could tell that there's a lot of course correction going on. We're like, oh, midichlorians, they don't like that. I'll scratch that scene out of episode 2. Mm-hmm. Oh, Jar Jar Binks, all right, you'll have a small but critical role in episode 2, and then like no lines in episode 3. I think he says "excuse me" at one point, because that's about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that throughout this trilogy that you can tell he's like revising his plan. Almost ready to. I guess we're almost kind of getting close to the end of the Tatooine thing, but we have obviously the pod race, which was such a huge deal when this movie came out. It's probably one of the sequences that has been discussed the most, aside from the lightsaber duel, which we'll get to shortly. And they had video game. I actually had Star Wars Racer Revenge on PlayStation 2 back in the day.
I had it on the N64.
Yeah,
so yes,
there you go.
Yep.
So that was a huge deal. I actually still think that sequence is pretty fun. I mean, it goes on probably a little bit too long, but again, there's all the fan service in that whole thing with Jabba the Hutt and Bib Fortuna and the Tusken Raiders. And I like the shots where it's basically the POV shots through the canyons. What are you how do you feel that the pod race sequence has held up 20 years later?
Well, I'll tell you, back during the late 90s, I think there was a very large NASCAR boom. Like NASCAR was really, really popular at that point in time. So I kind of think that the pod race was like the desert version of NASCAR. You've got the fanfare and the parade of flags and representing this and representing that and all the different types of pods, the different characters piloting those pods, just kind of made it really fun. You've got Sebulba, who I equated to Jeff Gordon at the time. Yeah. I don't know if you're a NASCAR fan or if the listeners are equating it back in the day where he was your kind of lovable guy, but he did what he needed to do in order to win the race. And that's basically what Sebulba was trying to do. And ultimately that, screwed him in the end. Spoiler alert, that Sebulba doesn't win. Anakin does. I think that whole sequence was really a lot of fun. And we mentioned about the video games. And I remember, I think it was at a Dave and Buster's that they actually had the video game where you sit in that.
Oh yeah,
like Anakin's like pod.
That.
And you're piloting the pod. Oh my god, that game is so much fun. I seriously doubt it's still there. I haven't been to Dave and Buster's in a while, but that whole sequence I think was just. Yeah, there was some fan service, like you said, with the characters that you saw at the race. But yeah, the point of view shot, the panoramic shot, just made that whole sequence visually stunning.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, they created, like, this movie spawned basically a pod racing culture. Like they like all those characters, of course, got action figures, but you could play as most of the racers from Boonta Eve in the game. Like I could actually probably name like 3 to 5 off the top of my head because I remember them vividly. Ben Quadraneros and Odie Mandrell and
Odie Mandrell. Yes,
it's like off the top, just because they make such a point of building that into the scene of, oh, here's this person from Malastare and this person, like all like the lineup of who's entering the race and everybody. It is very much feels like NASCAR, and we know that George Lucas is a car guy, and you can see that in everything going back to American Graffiti. That he likes. That's his thing. He's big into that, and that's why the speeders look like kind of in kind of like convertibles or like hot rods and that kind of thing. So this feels very much playing into him indulging in his love of cars in a sci-fi fantasy world, which is really fun. And I think it's probably one of the sequences in the film that has received the least amount of criticism in a lot of ways. And it helps that Jake Lloyd is mostly silent and just reacting during that sequence. But still, I think, and the visuals really, for the most part, hold up. So it's still largely a highlight, I would say. And,
absolutely.
And then, of course, he wins. No surprise there. But I think the farewell moment with him and his mom, Lloyd is fine in there, whatever. But Brunilla August really sells that. And they, the where she's saying, be brave and don't look back. Again, really planting the seeds for his turn to the dark side starts here, basically.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, I think Yoda brings up, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate. The hate leads to suffering. And I think, him missing his mother right off the bat, but her saying, don't look back, really should have stuck with him. And he probably would have been a lot better off if he had actually listened to that line. Mm-hmm. That, he dwelled on the past and he dwelled on missing his mother and he dwelled on what he was leaving behind. And that's ultimately what, like you said, what drove him to the dark side.
Yeah, he even says in this scene, he's like, I don't want things to change. And I'm like, oh, there you go. That's exactly you get like,
you're screwed, kid.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's why, they make a lot of, I'm jumping slightly ahead, but they make a big to-do about if he was born in the Republic, they would have identified him earlier. With Anakin and with Luke, they say, oh, we can't train him. He's too old because of this kind of attachment. In episode 2, they talk about, attachment is forbidden. You can't really fall in love because, again, it plays into this whole thing. So again, there's a lot of really good ideas that Lucas has in the philosophy of the Jedi and in Anakin's, turn that plays out really well. It's just not executed as well as it should have been, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So okay, so he leaves, and then we get the really the first real proper introduction to Darth Maul during the lightsaber duel with Peter Serafinowicz doing the voice and Ray Park. I don't know if it's the design or just the sheer fact that we haven't really seen this kind of acrobatics and choreography in lightsabers until he entered the picture. You go to A New Hope and it's an old man and another slightly younger but like cyborg man who could barely move, slapping sticks together. And then here it's like flipping and all this other stuff. What are your thoughts on Darth Maul and kind of the force, pun intended, that he's become?
It's exactly what you said. It was a different kind of villain. It was a different energy behind him. Like you said, in episode 4, you've got two old guys, who are, clanging lightsabers together and, whoop-de-doo. But then you've got this new villain who's all over the place. And, he's got the double-edged lightsaber, which is something that is totally new. And, people, it blew their minds. How can he have this weapon, this new confounded weapon? And, and the red just made him that much more menacing. The horns on his head and just the overall, I want to say creepiness to him, but he moved so quickly you didn't know like what his next move was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that just made him so much more of an exciting villain.
I like what he brings to the saga here, and the fact that he looks very demonic. It's the most we've gotten has been a wrinkled little guy in a hood and a scary robot mask, basically, with Vader and the breathing, and stuff, which is obviously iconic in its own way. But it's something about the Darth Maul design that's very visceral. And he feels like he stepped out of a way more intense movie, and then shows up in this PG space adventure with Jar Jar Binks across the way. He feels like he came from something much more serious. And I think that's it's smart that they doubled down on that in the expanded universe and really filled in the gaps, because ultimately I think introducing such a cool character and then dispatching him rather quickly, maybe not the smartest move. We could have had him in episode 2 instead of Dooku or something, even though I love Dooku too. So but that's totally different energy and totally different vibe that he gives off, obviously.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
So from there, we move into Coruscant, which is obviously one big city, and we get lots and lots of space politics, where we really get, I guess, a better look at Palpatine pulling the strings, and we get. I really like elements of this, and mostly the design elements. I love the fact that this is huge metropolis. I love the design of the Senate and the way that plays in at the end of Revenge of the Sith is so much fun.
Oh yeah.
Those scenes do feel, I think, kind of stilted, probably more than a lot of the other movies, because everybody is on formality and everybody's speaking in sort of a monotone. But I think it's valuable because it does lend some insight into how Palpatine is presenting options to Amidala, and how he's, I guess this is what the Sith are known for, how he's clouding her mind and kind of getting under her skin and obviously, manipulating the situation to get himself elected chancellor by the end. So, how do you feel about the space politics of it all as portrayed in the Coruscant section, which is mostly the Senate and then the Jedi Council?
Well, with the Senate, you walk in, the camera allows you to walk in and sit in the pod with, the folks from Naboo, but you realize just how big of an audience that Palpatine's really trying to get his hands on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in this movie in particular, he's manipulating Padme, he's manipulating, her in order to get the power that he ultimately desires. He's just using her as the avenue to get there. Once he finally, becomes chancellor. he's got his grip on a whole lot of people and a whole lot of star systems and a whole lot of planets once he gets that role. And that, obviously that was his ultimate goal. And the CGI of that room, it's so grand. And, we talked about the politics, that kind of led up to this, but you really see it and really kind of go, oh, wow. What's he getting in? What's he going to do once he gets his hands on everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Just the scale of what it is that he can ultimately do, I think is just crazy.
The way I see it is that everyone else is really playing checkers, and Sidious has this like decades long game of chess playing out. He's like, all right, step 1, become a senator. Step 2, become chancellor. And then 20, 30, 40 years later, I'll have a Death Star. I'll have an apprentice. I'll be all set and running the, you know what I mean? Like he is like, it's the most patient plan to conquer the universe that I've ever seen, because it takes decades for him for this really to come to fruition. And as you said, I think you realize the true scale of it in that scene.
The amount of the little pods, and there's fan service in there too, where you've got the pod of the ET creatures, and I believe there's a pod representing Kashyyyk and the Wookiees, and you get a lot of fan service there too. It kind of pays homage to other characters in I guess Spielberg's world too. Like I said, the scale of it, it kind of hits you that he's got his hands on something pretty big here.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually kind of a good transition, because Qui-Gon thinks that he's stumbled on something pretty big here with Anakin, and the fact that he sees him as a vergence in the Force. He thinks that he could bring balance, which, you could still argue one way or another. And I do feel like, in a way, to bring this saga together, I do feel like that balance is a very loaded term that will play into the Rise of Skywalker. And I feel like that question of balance that's raised here, we probably still haven't really gotten the final statement on what that means to bring the Force into balance.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that kind of gets tied up in episode 9, just to kind of bring everything finally full circle and understand what that actually means. What does that prophecy mean? Was the prophecy Anakin Skywalker?
Right.
Was the prophecy Luke Skywalker? Is the prophecy Rey? Mm-hmm. Or even, Ben? Who is the prophecy, and why? How are we getting that balance? And I really hope we kind of get that in episode 9. I'm not banking on it, but it's something. It's a plot point I think that really should be touched.
Yeah, I think so too. And because, to the Jedi, obviously the Jedi and the Sith are both looking at it from their perspective. Well, we want the Sith to rule, and the Jedi think that balance is if they're all Jedi. But, if they're all Jedi and there's no Sith, that's not balance either. So
that's not balance, right?
Yeah. It's the universe just keep flip-flopping out of balance. So they say that Anakin's too old, not going to be trained. And one thing that I've noticed that took me a while to realize this, even though I'd seen this movie a million times, that when Mace Windu says, no, he will not be trained, Anakin, like, you can tell he's sort of squinting, like, angrily in Mace Windu's direction. And he's got kind of this, like, seething, like, look to him, where you could tell that he's like, one day I'm going to be in a position where I could save you, or I could help a Sith Lord kill you, and maybe I'll, we'll see what happens, buddy. This is one of the only moments where I think Jake Lloyd actually does a really good performance in this scene, where he's reacting to that news. Is that something that you ever noticed before?
I don't think I really picked up on it right away, but I did pick up on it later on. He kind of gives him a scowl as if to say, well, who the hell are you, buddy? You're not the know-all, end-all, be-all. There's 12 of you on this council. You're just one dude.
Yeah, exactly. It's not fair. It's all Obi-Wan's fault.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's just it. I think that ultimately, like you said, he started his turn to the dark side just the moment he stepped away from his mother. But I think hearing those words come out of Mace Windu's mouth, he's like, oh, okay, I'll show you.
There's a certain arrogance to the Jedi too which people have commented on, but I was so happy that they mentioned in Last Jedi, because you see in this movie they have, in this movie and in the rest of the prequels, like they're so confident. Oh, it's no big deal. We'll figure out the mystery of the Sith, and they're like, oh, that couldn't have happened without us seeing it. And, there's this unwillingness to own up to their own flaws. That really carries out throughout this prequel, that the Jedi Council are kind of a bunch of dicks, that they think they know everything, but they're because they're sitting at the top of that tower, just like completely oblivious to everything else that's going on around them.
And Yoda even mentions that, hard to see the dark side is.
Yeah.
Well, if it's hard to see, take a little more time and try to dig into it, guys, because
right,
they're pulling the wool over your eyes left and right.
Exactly. So eventually, Amidala decides to go back to Naboo. She's like, all right, there's too much space politics for me. You take over, Senator. I'm heading out. And then we basically get a quiet moment with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan that I like that, because it brings closure to that dynamic that I mentioned earlier that we don't really see enough of in this movie, and they don't really get a chance to discuss the time that they've spent together, presumably a decade plus. Training from this point on, because it's pretty much all battle. And did you think what did you think of that scene, and then I guess the way that Amidala brings together the Naboo and the Gungans?
The Naboo and the Gungans, I think, was they've got this common enemy. They need to work together, and the Naboo, she pretty much says, my people are not warriors. Mm-hmm. But we need somebody who knows what they're doing. We know somebody who can help, and they have to basically recruit these Gungans to kind of fight the war for them. Their battle takes place, out in the field, and it's supposed to be a distraction in order to get the Amidala and her first mates, for lack of better words, into the city to get the Viceroy.
And it's interesting because from this point on, the film basically segments into quadruple battle climax. So you have, as you mentioned, the Gungans and the Trade Federation. That's the big CG battle, which you see that influence in a lot. Like even watching Avengers: Infinity War specifically, you see that this feels like the first example of a big CG army facing off against other CG characters. And, the visuals here were Oscar nominated because that hadn't really been done on that scale before, creating that world. And of course, Jar Jar ends up, fighting by accident, basically. So he's doing his he's
a Bombad general. Come on.
Apparently. he's like a slapstick warrior, as it were. And then we get Anakin also. So Anakin and Jar Jar are basically like their battles are basically comedies of errors, where he's like, oops, what does this do? Oh, not that button. And by accident destroys the Trade Federation, I guess, the main starship.
Right.
What are your thoughts of these two of the main characters basically saving the day because they just stumbled into the right cockpit / battlefield, I guess.
Right. Well, going back to the Gungans versus Lloyd, come out of that one ship, and they're lowered down layer by layer by layer, and they all stand up at that same time. Is so freaking cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
The special effects on that is that gave you chills. And with Jar Jar, dumb luck. Stupid dumb luck that he just he's throwing the boomers into the tanks and electrocuting the battle droid, and then the tank crashes, and then he's pulling the boomers out of the one trailer, for lack of better words, and and knocking out a whole bunch of vehicles and droids then too. Then he gives up. I give up. But going back up to Anakin kind of blew up the Trade Federation ship very similarly to the way that Luke blew up the Death Star. Mm-hmm. It was from the inside out. So I think that kind of homage was kind of cool. Once he realized what he did, he's like, okay, I got to get out of here. And then, once he gets out, the rest of the squadron's like, hey, that's one of ours, and that ship's blown up, and hey, we just accomplished our mission. Yay! Who is this kid? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
That it was so cool. But you mentioned about the other battles that are going on, and I know you kind of want to get into the lightsaber battle between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul. Kind of going on an opposite end of the CGI, I kind of found where the lightsaber battle had a lot of flaws, the green screen flaws.
Mm-hmm.
If you really watch that scene close, you can really tell where I think they kind of got sloppy in the cleanup in the post-production, where the background's even kind of blurry. And that's the film critic in me just kind of thinking stupid that. But that's one of the scenes where I kind of, it was an epic battle, and the choreography and the lightsaber battle itself is crazy, insane, good fun. Ray Park is a martial arts genius, but I think that the effects kind of drew a little bit away from that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think it's, it was an epic battle, and it had a lot of meaning and a lot of energy behind it, but it almost kind of got distracting. And it's the things I didn't notice, when I first saw the movie. I think it's kind of over the years of seeing it on DVD and then Blu-ray and then on TV all the time. Mm-hmm. Where I kind of watch it and go, oh, I really never noticed that before, but boy, that looks bad. I expect more of ILM, but it's more where I think they're kind of in where there's the towers of, I guess, a light, the energy of some sort.
Yeah, some kind of reactor, I think.
Right, yeah. That area there is a little sloppy, but yeah, once you kind of get into where there's those the laser doors, for, I guess, that's what you want to call them. Then after that, I think it kind of, the effects kind of don't bother me as much. Mm-hmm. But those couple of scenes before that, I think were kind of sloppy.
Yeah, I could see that. I think, with that sequence in particular, you can tell that they really focus so much more on the actors and the choreography and the way that John Williams score, and obviously Duel of the Fates. Oh, so awesome.
Yeah.
One of the best pieces in the saga, I would say, pieces of music, which they reused again in episode 3. And it just seems like a good enough moment as any to really praise what John Williams did in this movie, not just with Duel of the Fates, but like there's so many. He had to create a Naboo theme. Anakin has a theme in here that is really, really beautiful. I think a lot of people focus so much on Duel of the Fates that they don't really listen to the rest of the score. Like he has, I don't know. He created another world within this world that he had already created musically, if that makes sense.
Definitely. I couldn't imagine Star Wars without John Williams. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's just he just knows how to speak musically, and it just, the man's a genius. And John Williams is a god.
Yeah, and I think that the Duel of the Fates battle is really it's really his moment to shine in this film, like his most obvious moment to shine. Battle, the choreography at Ray Park, as you mentioned, who is an X-Men right after this, and Sleepy Hollow right after this also.
Around the same time.
Yeah, same year. He fights with such ferocity, and both him and Obi-Wan have, especially after Qui-Gon is killed, Obi-Wan just has this burst of energy, and that to me is like the most intense moment of the fight, because it's the emotion is running high because of Qui-Gon, and that's also to me when the Obi-Wan Kenobi that we love is really born. It's in that moment when he sees his master killed. That's where he grows up. He stops being the whiny 20-something, I guess, that he was at the beginning of the movie, and literally picks up his master's weapon.
Yeah, and in no time flat, slices Maul in half. I mean, the quickness of that. Basically adrenaline rush, force rush, whatever you want to call it. That there didn't need to be another battle. Qui-Gon's gone. Here's what I need to do, and it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing to it, and there didn't need to be. It was that simple. And that, you watched Obi-Wan watch, Maul fall down that chute, and he's like, "Yep, it is done." And now he knows he needs to move on, and what he needs to do, and he needs to train Anakin, and he needs to, get his rank of master, and he walked away with purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Maul starts tumbling down that shaft, and it's like, definitely not going to see that guy in the story anytime soon, ever again.
Or so we thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Or so we thought.
Exactly. But it also, seeing his master, who's essentially a father to him at that point, seeing him, be killed right in front of him where he couldn't help him, and that the fact that training Anakin is his dying wish, you buy the fact that this upright, well, we got to do what the council says, that this young Jedi would flip to honor his master's dying wish, and I guess pick up a little bit of Qui-Gon's defiance that Yoda senses in him in that scene there. So I love that. That's to me, because there's always in every other movie other than this one, Obi-Wan has a little bit of edge to him. There's a little, there's a playful, sort of almost sassy undertone to a lot of his behavior. even in episode 4, there's a little bit of that going on. So I feel like this is where he really inherits that from Qui-Gon, and yeah, McGregor is, from this point on, McGregor is so great in the part in the other films. So it's nice to see that Obi-Wan kind of comes to fruition in that moment. And of course, the Amidala thing, and so they get the Viceroy. They're gonna redo the treaty, and it's funny because Captain Panaka says, "Oh, I think you can kiss your trade franchise goodbye," but it seems like they're still in charge of stuff in the next movie. So I guess there weren't really no repercussions in that. I guess it's the benefit of having a Sith Lord running the galaxy.
Exactly. I mean, did much change with the Trade Federation? Not really.
Yeah.
Did they have the stronghold over Naboo anymore? It kind of didn't seem that way. It seemed like when in episode 2, when they go back to Naboo, that there is quite the turmoil and the tension that there was, in episode 1. But there's no repercussions for guys like that. I mean, slime balls are slime balls.
Yep.
They're going to get what they want whenever, how they want it. And they'll, like you said, with the Sith Lord running things.
Par for the course in a corrupt galaxy like this. So the film ends with a big celebration, and there's peace between the Gungans and Naboo. But right before that is the more interesting ending, which is the Qui-Gon's funeral. Which even when before I saw this movie, I know that the track on the soundtrack is Qui-Gon's Noble End. So I was like, dude, don't tell me that.
Is it Qui-Gon's Noble End, or is it actually called Qui-Gon's Funeral? That's
I think
they
one of the two. Maybe Qui-Gon's Noble End is the moment when he gets killed, and then there's Qui-Gon's funeral right after. But either way, it's a spoiler.
Either way, spoiler alert. And I know that the soundtrack and the book both came out about 3 weeks before the movie actually came out.
Right.
And I think they've kind of learned by doing that I don't know if for episodes 2 and 3 if these things came out before the films actually hit, but I know at least for the sequel trilogy, the soundtrack and the book are not released until that movie's actually released. Mm-hmm. That we've actually kind of got into a habit of when after we go see the movie, we ended up at Walmart buying the soundtrack right after we finished watching the film for these last two. And then the book, the novelization doesn't even come out until weeks after the film came out, But like I told you before, that I had actually read the book before seeing the movie, and did that, obviously, spoilers, I knew what was going to go on. I think they've learned their lesson to not do that anymore.
Yeah, I just in case this is 20 years ago, but obviously it still burns me a little bit. Just in case because I listen to scores a lot when I'm writing or whatever doing on the computer. So I did not look up the Avengers Endgame score until I saw the movie, just in case there were spoilers in there, because it's as simple as, and there aren't really, but it's as simple as just not go with the Michael Giacchino route where all his tracks are like puns, things like that. I like that better. You don't have to could have called it a noble end or something. You didn't have to be like Qui-Gon's gonna die. You might as well have titled it. Yeah. But I like that we learn in that scene that the funeral pyre that Luke has for Vader, that's I guess sort of a Jedi funeral, because the Qui-Gon's funeral here very much is calling that to mind. And of course we get the hint of Obi-Wan training Anakin, the Master and the Apprentice, which was destroyed, and that whole thing. And it's like, boom, the Phantom Menace. It's like, he's right there, guys. Turn around. Get your heads out of your asses, out of the Jedi Temple, see some of the world. It's not that hard. He looks evil. Look.
And the camera even pans. I believe the last person that the camera focuses on before the scene changes is Palpatine.
Yep. And so I love the way that sets up the relationship with Anakin and Obi-Wan. We even see Anakin with the little Padawan braid in the next scene in the celebration. So that's it's I think overall it's a satisfying way to end the film. It's a hint at what's to come, and even though there are a lot of elements of it that I think don't work overall, I still enjoy watching it. There are moments that make me cringe, but there's other stuff that's really cool, and that little details that plant the seeds for what comes to fruition later on in episodes 2 and 3. So is there anything in the movie we didn't cover? I know the conversation went much longer than we intended. I guess we had a lot more. To dig into. So it's going to be fun for me trying to edit this down a little bit.
Good luck, buddy. Sorry.
It's all good. Did we touch on anything? Did we miss anything that we wanted to mention about the movie, or want to just...
No, it's just to wrap up some general thoughts. It was a well-rounded ensemble cast. I think that, it was enough of, you had your little bit of a star power. You had enough of the B and C level actors that kind of rounded things out. And you had your classic folks, your folks who have come back from the original trilogy, with the obvious ones. It told a story that obviously we all wanted to know. Did it have its flaws? Sure. But ultimately, it's a good movie. It's a good Star Wars story. The critics can pan it all you want, but, I still enjoy it. If it's on TV, I will still watch it. If I'm bored, I will still throw the soundtrack on, my iPod, or I will still grab the Blu-ray and throw it in and have it, playing. It's one of those movies I can still go back to and still enjoy 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And ultimately, when it comes right down to it, it's still Star Wars. So that's why I mean, if you don't like it, don't watch it. It's a part of why it makes watching films for me, like very rarely would I watch a movie and say that it was a complete waste of my time, first of all. And so this movie, even though it has its flaws, there's a lot of good stuff in it. And I think some people that write it off because of, Jake Lloyd's performance or because of Jar Jar or whatever, I mean, I think they need to watch it a little more closely. And there's a lot of stuff in here. But for some people, it's not the original trilogy, so it's never going to measure up. They have this ridiculous bar that no other Star Wars film is ever going to hit. So it's like, well, sorry, then I guess these movies aren't for you. But for the rest of us, there is a lot of enjoyment to be had from them. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about this one. And I'm even more excited to have subsequent conversations about the next films. So Kimberly, thank you so much for coming on the Crooked Table podcast. Can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
Absolutely. Hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at KimmySue1024. I accept all, my stuff's open, so you don't have to private message me or anything. My Twitter and my Instagram are open for fair game. You can also follow my work on Monkey Sparing Robots and popvacuum.com, both websites. Look forward to wrapping with you again soon. I know we have a couple other movies that we were thinking about getting together to discuss, and maybe the next time we won't take 2 hours to do it.
Well, Star Wars everything has to be contextualized, and so it's like, well, that in episode 2, or whatever. So,
but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. I know you'd mentioned. I think one you mentioned was Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yes,
that would be a lot of fun.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off is actually my favorite movie of all time. I can recite that movie. So I had a lot of fun talking Star Wars with you, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have to have you back. In the meantime, thanks so much for coming on. This was so much fun.
Yes, I had a blast. Thanks.
Thanks, Kimberly.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.